Discovered my new husband's secret plans with his longtime crush the moment my wedding dress was still on my hanger. I, 25F, got married to my husband, 24 male, we'll call him Jim, a week ago after dating for 2.5 years. Jim has a friend called Misha, 22F, who was invited to the wedding. He and Misha have known each other since high school and were close friends, and Misha had a very obvious crush on Jim from what he and others who know them have told me. Jim told me this after I met Misha for the first time and confessed that he leaned into her crush and led her on throughout their high school years and for a little while after, before we got together, because he was struggling with his mental health and he really liked her attention. He seemed genuinely guilty about all of that because he thought Misha was a nice girl and a good friend, and because he showed guilt I didn't feel the need to bring it up or argue about it despite thinking it was a shitty thing to do. Plus, Misha is a nice girl who has never overstepped boundaries and has been nothing but kind and friendly towards me, and I now consider her a friend too. Misha moved away to the city last year and has done really well for herself and has a long-term boyfriend who none of us have met yet, so when it came to sending wedding invites, I told her she was welcome to bring him as her +1. The first red flag came when Jim was weirdly resistant to the idea of Misha bringing her boyfriend, but he excused it on being concerned about the number of guests we invited, and the matter was dropped. When the wedding day came, Misha showed up in this beautiful dress, nothing inappropriate for a wedding, and with her boyfriend on her arm, who I'll admit is a very handsome guy, think a Kit Harington type. She's also lost weight and has a haircut that suits her better, and I thought she looked great. We also found out throughout the night that her boyfriend is very successful and earns more than practically anyone else who attended. Throughout the reception I noticed Jim glaring at Misha and her boyfriend the whole time, and he was really cold and short towards her when she came over to congratulate us and give us a gift. He was also straight up kinda rude to her boyfriend when Misha introduced us to him. When his mom, who's always known and liked Misha, mentioned that she was glad Misha found a great guy and praised her boyfriend for being so nice, Jim snapped that at least she won't be desperate and hung up on me for the rest of her life, which I thought was cruel and uncalled for, but I didn't challenge him because I didn't want to argue at my wedding despite the fact that he frankly sounded bitter. The whole thing has left an awful taste in my mouth, and I can't help but think that Jim got jealous that Misha has found a guy who's honestly quite a catch, who she's clearly very in love with and is now completely over Jim. Half update: after getting some PMs from people, I decided to go through his phone while he was napping after work, and needless to say this marriage is over. I'll post a real update when I have sorted everything out. Update 1. Pretty much the day after my original post, I got some PMs from people suggesting that I go through my husband Jim's phone to see if he and Misha were truly just friends before this and that nothing romantic happened between them that would explain his reaction at the wedding. He always takes a 45-minute nap after work, and so I used that as my opportunity to swipe his phone from where it was charging on his desk so that I could look through it. I've seen him put in his passcode a ton of times, so that wasn't an issue. I didn't find anything in his texts with her, but I know that Jim goes on Instagram a lot, so I checked there too. The immediate red flag was that he'd used an app lock that required a passcode to access Instagram, but the dumbass used the same passcode that he uses to unlock his phone, so I got into that right away. It's his birth year, go figure. And what would you know? I go to his messages with Misha and find messages from him the morning after our wedding, telling her how beautiful she'd looked that night, how much he'd missed her, how he felt that her boyfriend being there spoiled his opportunity to catch up with her, and that he was desperate to meet up with her. Misha never replied to these messages, and he sent some more to her later that day. I won't get into what he said because they were very personal insults that were frankly just gross, but just think about the kind of stuff you would read on that nice guys subreddit. Misha left him on read, and when I clicked on her account it appears that she's blocked him. I scrolled through their messages quite far back and I believe nothing romantic has happened between them. I wish that was all, but looking into his other conversations on Instagram, I found that he's been messaging other girls on there. They seemed like aspiring Instagram model types from our area. Most of these conversations were just him shooting his shot and getting left on red, but others had evolved into flirting, and 2 of them resulted in sexting. And the most embarrassing part of all? The nudes he was sending to these women weren't even of him. I know what his body looks like, and he doesn't have chiseled abs and isn't that well endowed. I think he must have found a man's profile on some adult website and used those pictures, just cropping the face out. These 2 conversations happened in the past 6 months. I ended up texting his mom and his brother from my phone asking them to come and pick him up from the apartment, and then I went to wake him up. I told him that I knew about the girls he was messaging on Instagram, that he needed to pack a bag and get the hell out before I started throwing his stuff out onto the street and causing a scene. He started crying and begging me not to kick him out and swore that they were just messages and that he would never actually cheat on me, but I don't believe him for a second. Then he had the nerve to tell me that he didn't want me to tell anyone else about what he'd done, but I had left the room and started ignoring him by that point. He left with his mom and brother and is staying there from what I know. I've blocked him on everything for the time being until I'm ready to tell him that I'm seeking annulment. Thankfully where I'm from, you can get one almost no questions asked as long as you haven't been married for longer than 30 days, and I've already looked into the process. I haven't really left my apartment at all this week, and I've been calling in sick to work because I don't feel like I can face people. Update 2. You'll be glad to hear that I was able to get the annulment and I didn't have to go through a messy divorce with Jim. I struck an agreement with him that I wouldn't tell a soul about his cheating or what happened with Misha and would leave him alone forever if he agreed to the annulment and got it over quickly. I did end up sticking my end of the bargain, but it ended up not mattering because it turns out his brother is quite the gossip and let the cat out of the bag over Christmas after getting into an argument with Jim while drunk. A lot of Jim's family were pissed and asked for the money they contributed to his half of the wedding fund back, and some of our mutual friends have cut contact with him. A couple of our friends plastered everything on Facebook and humiliated him. It was interesting to watch the back and forth between them and Jim, honestly. I lived in our apartment and covered the rent on my own while he lived at his parents' until the lease ended back in January, and I'm now living with my dad and I plan to stay here for a while and take things easy. In January I also tried reaching out to Misha via text asking if she'd like to meet up for coffee to talk about anything. I never got a response directly from her, but a few days later I got a call from her number and it was her boyfriend on the other end. He said they were both sorry for what had happened to me and that they hope I'm doing well, but that Misha thought it was best cease any contact as this whole ordeal had made her anxiety and mental health problems spiral and had landed her back in therapy. I did ask why she never told me that Jim had messaged her the day after the wedding and her boyfriend confessed that he advised her not to get involved, and his direct words were, "I'm sorry to sound rude, but it's not her circus." I'm a little disappointed that she doesn't want to talk to me, but I get where she's coming from and I can't force her to do anything. To be honest, I think she's been looking for a way to divorce herself from our hometown and the people she and Jim knew back in high school for a while now. As for me, I'm also in therapy as I want to sort through these feelings and get back to feeling good about myself again before I even think about entering the dating scene again. I've also been firm about ending friendships with anyone who's taken Jim's side, as I don't want him finding his way into my life again. So far he stayed away from me and hasn't tried to contact me, although his mom reached out over Christmas to ask me if there was any chance I might forgive Jim and take him back, as, in her opinion, you two are just meant to be together. I didn't respond to her and I've blocked her on pretty much everything now too. Update 3. In late February, things finally felt like they were dying down. I was mostly focused on work and therapy, still living with my dad, not thinking much about Jim besides the occasional "wow, glad I dodged that bullet." I actually thought I had reached some sort of détente with the universe. Shows how much I know. At the start of March, 2 weird incidents happened within days of each other. First, my dad called me while I was at work to ask if I was expecting a delivery. Some guy with a huge, fancy bouquet and a box of expensive chocolates had shown up asking for me. But there was no card, just the stuff and a receipt from a high-end florist in the city. My dad, sweet man that he is, said he took the flowers just in case. He kept joking about secret admirers, but all I felt was this crawling, uncomfortable déjà vu. I posted a photo of the bouquet on my Finsta to try figure out whether it was someone's idea of a prank or what. The next day a card appeared in my mailbox. It was blank except for a QR code in the middle, which of course I scanned because curiosity trumps sense. It took me to a private Google Drive with a short audio message from. It took me a while, but I recognized his voice, Jim's brother. He apologized for blowing everything up and, in classic Midwestern guilt mode, wondered if I would be willing to meet over coffee. A mutual friend told me he'd moved to my city recently and wanted to clear the air, whatever that meant. More on this in a second. Then things escalated, dramatically. A few days later, I got a call from my old leasing office that someone, not technically me, had been requesting information on when I'd return to pick up leftover mail. They asked if I would authorize a representative to collect it. I hadn't given anyone permission. I asked who it was, thinking maybe it was my ex, or Jim's mom. Nope, it was Misha. Yup. Apparently she'd driven out to the old complex while she was back in town visiting family, wanting to make sure nothing personal had been left in the mailbox by mistake. When the office mentioned my name, she told them she was a close friend and wanted to make sure I got everything. The thing is, I never mentioned to her the old lease was ending, or that I had mail there. Nobody but my parents, and, possibly, Jim, knew. Something was up. And then, I started receiving Instagram DMs, from burner accounts with one post, telling me that Jim was spiraling, that I'd ruined his life, and that I owed him closure. At first I ignored it. But the messages kept coming, this time with photos of me at work, outside my favorite coffee shop, even pulling into my gym parking lot. Someone was following me. I freaked out. I ended up going to the police, not because I expected much, but because my therapist insisted. They told me to keep screenshots and report anything else, but unless someone did something physical, their hands were tied. Classic. That same week, I happened to run into Misha's boyfriend, let's call him Kit, because he really is that annoyingly handsome, outside a popular bakery. There was no angst or drama. He actually apologized that things had gotten messy, and told me he'd been meaning to check in, because Misha was also being harassed online. Apparently, she'd started getting DMs from similar burner accounts, and some were even more unhinged. Threats, weird poems, bad song lyrics. I suspect Jim, because who else? Kit said they'd moved apartments after someone tried to accidentally meet Misha at her office. Yeah. That level of weird. I'll be honest, this is when I started to get scared. I wondered if Jim really was spiraling, or if this was just him trying to regain some kind of control. I started taking different routes home. I changed my workout hours, left my phone with my dad when I went out. I even wore a baseball cap and glasses like the world's worst undercover agent. My therapist suggested a restraining order, but I held off, mostly out of stubborn pride, and, okay, a little denial. 2 weeks ago, it all came to a head. I got home super late, one of those long Friday nights at the office, finishing a major deadline. My dad was out at a friend's birthday, so I opened the door and immediately heard my name being called. I about jumped out of my skin, but thank God it was just Jim's brother, let's call him Mark, sitting politely on the porch. Mark looked about 10 years older than last time I'd seen him, and was quietly holding a manila envelope. He told me he needed to get something off his chest. Jim wasn't just having a hard time, he'd actually broken into Misha's old apartment in the city back in January, thinking he'd find proof she was cheating or something. With who? He'd been caught, and narrowly avoided charges because Misha refused to press them, on the condition he got therapy and stayed away. Mark was asking for my help to convince Jim to commit to inpatient care, and showed me the letter Jim had written to Misha. A messy, rambling thing that made no sense and rambled on about unfinished business, soul ties, and, mortifyingly, what could have been if not for the wedding. I told Mark, gently, that I loved him as an in-law and he hadn't done anything wrong, but I had nothing left to give Jim. I told him to focus on his own healing and maybe cut contact for a while, for his own sake. Mark just nodded, and said he was planning to go no contact if Jim wouldn't get help. Then he quietly handed me a sheet of paper, his number and a copy of the letter, in case you ever want to see what I've been dealing with. That night, I sat and read through it all. For the first time in months, I didn't feel fear or anger, just exhaustion. I decided then and there, I was done. No more loose ends, no more peacemaking, none of it. So, the real update, I filed for a restraining order against Jim for both myself and Misha, with her and Kit's blessing, a very grown-up phone call that ended with the three of us making half-joking plans to go bowling someday. I started consulting with an attorney. My goal, make it clear that any further harassment will land Jim with an actual police record. I handed over the burner account info, the notes, everything to the police. So did Kit, and we now have a shared incident log Google Doc, which is both horrifying and weirdly comforting. I started interviewing for jobs in another state, something I'd always wanted to do but was scared to try. The idea of a proper fresh start sounds more appealing by the day. And, in a genuine twist, after all this, Misha did send me a real message. It was short but sweet. She apologized for the radio silence, said she'd been overwhelmed, but wished me the best and thanked me for standing up, even when it was scary and lonely. She even sent me a Spotify playlist, pure cottagecore bops and 2 Frozen Bachelorette anthems. I cried listening to it. I still don't know how things will pan out with Jim and his family. Maybe nothing changes, maybe everything does. But some tiny, battered part of me feels lighter. I see now that closure might not be a single event, but a choice you make, one unshared playlist, one lawyer letter, and one emotional therapy session at a time. Maybe someday I'll have a story that's about beginnings, not endings. For now, this will do. Update 4. So, right after filing the joint restraining order, yes, it was granted for both me and Misha. Turns out concerted paper trails and a surprisingly sympathetic new detective make a difference. I was actively job hunting out of state and interview or ghosting on LinkedIn like it was a competitive sport. My lease here at Dad's place was month to month, and after the relentless will I get stalked today? Anxiety, the idea of any new skyline was delicious. But then, I got an email from a city where I'd only applied on a dare, the one place I'd always talked myself out of for being too expensive, too competitive, too big. Some congrats, offer attached, and a start date barely 6 weeks out. It was real. I accepted that afternoon. Dad did his quiet, proud dad good job, kid, but when I told my therapist, I actually cried. Messy, grateful, holy crap, I'm not stuck tears. But while that should have been the whole plot, life had different plans. The day after I turned in my keys at my now former employer, I got a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. It was an admin at a big therapy center in our old town. The message was clipped, but basically, we're calling about your ex-husband, Jim. He listed you as an emergency contact in his inpatient program forms. There's been an incident, he's been admitted following a crisis, but is safe. My stomach dropped. I hadn't spoken to him, or anyone, in weeks. Cue a whirlwind of uncomfortable decisions. The center confirmed he wasn't allowed phone access but had listed both me and his brother, Mark. I called Mark, who sounded beyond exhausted, but quietly relieved. Jim had actually checked himself in after a breakdown at home. Mark apologized for blowing up my phone, said he'd be deleting my number from all Jim's official forms, and assured me that once Jim was stable, he'd be moving several hours away, under proper supervision. More relief, a little closure. But wait, more drama. Within 2 days, I started getting emails, not from Jim, but from Jim's mom, who, yes, I blocked everywhere else. Different accounts, with varying subject lines, all designed to guilt trip me. Some were classic he never would have spiraled if you'd supported him, others accused Misha of destroying a young man's future. I ignored them, but screenshot every last one and sent them to my lawyer. Every time, I half wondered if it was just another attempt to breach that restraining order. My lawyer took it so seriously that we updated the filing to include her. Meanwhile, Misha and Kit sent me a cheerful little housewarming present. It was a literal new city survival kit, local coffee beans, a street food guide, and a mug that said, "Definitely not Jim." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone FaceTiming them the next night. In that call, we finally actually talked, not just about Jim, but everything, our own anxieties, our careers, our stupid favorite movies. It felt normal again, or maybe normal for the very first time. We even made a real plan to meet for that bowling date this summer, halfway between our new cities. And then, for the most surreal part, one of the burner Instagram accounts that had harassed us both slipped up. Thanks to some mutual tech-savvy friend of Kit's, we discovered it was not Jim, but a random friend of Jim's from college, someone he'd vented to, who decided to take initiative posting on his behalf when he saw Jim upset at a bar. This guy was found, contacted, and, after some brief legal threats, messaged formal apologies to both me and Misha. Yes, it was gross and boundary blurring, but honestly, the relief at knowing Jim wasn't organizing some grand scheme gave me back a huge piece of my peace of mind. The guy also ended up getting a stern talking to from the police. It turns out, impersonation/stalking online towards someone with a restraining order is very much a crime. Here's where it gets a bit, dare I say, poetic? My new city is bigger, faster, and mercifully anonymous. I've started walking to work, sunrise or rain, and none of the people across intersections know anything about me except that my coffee order is high caffeine, highest hope. Slowly but surely, my nervous system is relaxing. I adopted a dog from the shelter, a rescue with only one ear, who snores and hates drama. His name is Waffles. Every couple weeks, Mark, the good in-law, checks in via text. Our messages are short, pragmatic. I wish him luck with therapy. He tells me he started pottery. He finally told me that Jim might be moving abroad for rehab long-term, breaking all old ties. I wished him well. A few old friends from my hometown circled back, apologizing for not trusting me about Jim's patterns back then. I told them, lessons cost what they cost. And I let myself move on. And Misha? In a real-world scene that would make my therapist proud, we met up for a day trip. We drank overpriced coffee, went to a farmer's market, and for the first time, did not talk about Jim, not his name, not his drama. Just careers, pets, hopes, and which flavor of scone is overrated. The answer is anything with lavender. The night of my last therapy session before the move, my therapist told me, gently, wisely, you kept waiting for the last chapter. I think you already wrote it. The sequel is up to you. So here's my new, unremarkable, incredibly beautiful life. My name is on a new lease, my dog hogs my bed, my group chats are full of memes and movie plans, and I don't have to look over my shoulder anymore. Maybe, in the truest sense, the wildest thing is how normal, how mine, my story feels for the first time in years. And if closure is coffee with a friend, a playlist, an apartment key, and no more secret admirers or QR codes, then I'll take it 1,000 times over. Update 5. Here we are, a full 6 months since I last wrote anything, and somehow everything feels less like a wild roller coaster and more like a train gently picking up speed, still moving forward, but on tracks I actually chose this time. If you told me last winter that I'd have an ordinary, boring month where the only real problem is that my dog learned to open the fridge, I'd have laughed until I cried. But I guess the universe can be both ridiculous and gracious when it wants. First, I got promoted at my new job. Not an earth-shattering, they named the conference room after me kind of promotion, but a real one, and it came with a fat envelope, fancy stationery, and a surprised phone call from my old manager. Didn't see you as a networker. Turns out trauma makes you a little less terrified to introduce yourself in crowded rooms. I haven't told many people about my hometown saga, just enough to draw my boundaries, and the version I tell ends with, and that's why I value peace and reliable Wi-Fi above all else. Second, I finally hosted a little get-together in my new place. It was accidental at first. My neighbor's power went out, so she, 2 friends from my building, and my 1 friend from therapy all crowded onto my postage stamp balcony with a pitcher of sangria and a jury-rigged Bluetooth speaker. At some point in the blur of playlists and dog treats, someone asked me if I was from nearby. And for the first time since I moved, I said, no, but I like it here. I meant it, too. Waffles, my one-eared chaos angel, has basically become the mayor of the dog park. He barks at men with top knots and has a crush on a Samoyed named Peaches, whose owner, Julian, is the most earnest, unironically plant-obsessed person I have ever met. Julian also, apparently, is a phenomenal baker, which is how I spent last Sunday lugging a rhubarb tart home and thinking, maybe the universe is apologizing for 2023. We'll see. So far, there's been nothing more scandalous than exchanged playlists and 2 dog play dates. But I won't lie, sometimes I think about how simple it is, how right it feels not to be explaining someone else's mistakes or dodging burner Instagram DMs. I just get to be the main character in my own tiny life again. I also jumped back into therapy, but now it's mostly about the future, not the past. My therapist, new city, new approach, challenged me to make a list of all the things you refuse to try. Cue roller skating, joining a trivia league, I suck but I am so competitive you'd think the fate of nations rested on Canadian geography questions, and, my proudest, signing up for an 8-week creative writing group that meets in a historic brownstone with enough lead paint to fell a buffalo. I read a story last session about a woman whose dog dragged her into a crowd and somehow learned to fetch lost wallets. Everyone laughed, and nobody asked why my stories always have happy endings these days. Now, the actual plot twist. In June, I received an email from Jim's brother, Mark. Not a plea, not family drama, just a short, kind note telling me that Jim did move abroad, and, to his knowledge, was still in care. Mark attached a scan of a letter from Jim himself. At first, I dreaded the usual emotional landmines, but it was sober. Earnest. He said he was sorry. He said, thank you for drawing boundaries, that he wouldn't reach out, but wanted me to know he was trying, really trying, to be someone who made less hurt behind him. I sat with it for a week. I didn't reply. I think for the first time, I didn't have to. That same week, Misha and Kit went ahead and got engaged. They sent me an actual wax-sealed card, complete with a cartoon of the four of us at a bowling alley and my dog in a tiara. I sent them a glitter bomb in return. We've kept up our odd little group chat, mostly memes in which city does summer worse? Debates, but we are, fingers crossed, finally meeting again for our bowling rematch in September. Sometimes Misha and I talk one-on-one, and those conversations are soft, careful, and about everything except the past. I suspect we're both still healing, but it's a process neither one of us has to narrate anymore. I see my dad most weekends. His big news is that he wants a one-eared dog of his own, for facial symmetry, he insists, totally deadpan, and we've taken up Sunday omelets and crossword puzzles, like the old days. I sometimes think those small things, a dog, a cup of tea, a new street to wander, are the prizes you get for walking through hell and coming out, not saint-like or unscathed, but just still yourself, maybe a little more than you started. Sometimes, I still hear rumors from the old crowd, Jim's family drama, or who's moved away, or what mutual friends are up to. I no longer feel paranoid or haunted when an unknown number texts. I just block, delete, and step back into my new life. It's strange to write a Reddit update where nothing disastrous has happened, no flames or wild discoveries, just the slow, steady process of building a life that's my own. Healing isn't cinematic, but I think I finally understand why people keep at it, because one day it's not about surviving, it's about living. Planning a trip just because I want to, giving my number to someone who makes me laugh, letting go of the question of what if in favor of what next. And that's the wildest thing yet. My story isn't about Jim, or about what was taken, or who got closure first. It's coffee with friends, dog hair on my favorite sweater, the promise of better days. It's hope, slow, boring, genuinely good hope, all the way through.